Bryce Harper is baseball's chosen one. People knew his name and heard tales of his talent for half a decade before he debuted for the Nationals in 2012. Somehow, someway, he's lived up to the impossible billing. Harper will be a Hall of Famer. He's a two-time MVP, Rookie of the Year, so on and so forth. But there's one stretch of Harper's career that's always been especially fascinating to me. The only time in his prime where he couldn't hit. Bryce Harper's 2015 was the best offensive season since Barry Bonds. He won the NL MVP. And on the heels of that season, he began 2016 in a similar fashion. He crushed a homer in his first at-bat of the year, sparking the Nationals' 9-1 start of the season. Through May the 4th, exactly a month after opening day, he had a .1021 OPS, 10 homers, and 5 steals. His quality of contact was slightly worse than in 2015. And he was pulling slightly fewer fly balls, but he was still the most feared batter in MLB on that date. For that reason, Joe Maddon decided not to let Harper beat him. With the Nationals visiting the north side of Chicago for a 4-game series, a potential NLCS preview, Harper's name was circled on the Cubs clubhouse whiteboard. And I mean it when I say Chicago's pitchers gave him nothing. Harper took 19 plate appearances in the series. He saw just 18 pitches in the zone, and he drew 13 walks. This was the Barry Bonds treatment on steroids. Or, I guess off steroids. On Mother's Day Sunday, the final game of the set, Harper stepped up to bat 7 times. He took 6 walks and got hit by a pitch. Out of the 27 pitches he saw on that day, he did not swing the bat once. Maddon's strategy shouldn't have worked. Harper's OPS in the series was over 1,000. He was on base over 70% of the time, but he did no damage, putting the burden of driving in runs on his teammates. And the result was a 4-game sweep by Chicago. But more importantly for our story, Joe Maddon broke Bryce Harper. For the rest of the season, Harper hit below league average, homering just 14 times in 495 plate appearances. He was worth 1.3 FWAR through the series at Wrigley Field. He accumulated just 0.6 in the remainder of the season. There has never been an elongated stretch in Harper's career where he was such an easy out. In his injury-riddled 2014, he didn't play this poorly. He played through a torn UCL later in his career, and he hit significantly better. I've made 2 full videos of Linsanity Runs in MLB, covering flash-in-the-pan stretches from unknown players like Yermin Mercedes and Aristides Aquino. But this video is about the opposite phenomenon, when a great or even Hall of Fame level player goes from peak performance to terrible seemingly overnight. Let's call it getting monstered. I only have 2 qualifying rules, and they are as follows. Number 1. No significant injuries or illnesses. And number 2, the player has to be great both before and after their terrible stretch run. The goal is to figure out why each of these players got monstered, and I'm not sure I have the answer for each one, but Harper's case is a fairly simple solution. Some of the articles and quotes I've read about Harper's 2016 characterize it as a young and impatient player not taking what he was given. In a general sense, that's fairly logical reasoning. You'd maybe expect that Harper got more aggressive after reaching base 70% of the time in that series and losing every game, and the theory is bolstered by Harper's known hothead attitude and fiery play. The only problem is that the data just doesn't back this up. Harper maintained a 16% walk rate after leaving Chicago, higher than the 15% rate he entered the series with. The problem was that he was making weaker contact, hitting a lot of weak fly balls and not pulling fly balls over the fence. This rolled over into October. Harper didn't have a bad NLDS versus the Dodgers, but he had just 1 extra base hit in 5 games. He took his walks, but he failed to slug. So why was that the case? Some people, like Agent Scott Boras, say that Harper played through injury. That might be true, but it means nothing coming from Boras, and MLB players are pretty much always playing through something. My theory is that everyone was in Harper's ear telling him to take what he was given, and for that reason, then, his approach got way too passive. Harper's 2016 is a career outlier in terms of first pitch swing rate, fastball swing rate, in-zone swing rate, and swing rate while ahead in the count. In terms of strikeout rate, chase rate, and whiff rate, 2016 was his best full season, but it's also his worst season overall. After the series in Chicago, he swung at 71% of pitches in the heart of the plate in the remainder of the season. That's down from 75% before that series. This means that he was leaving good damage pitches on the table more than ever. Madden simply handed the muzzle to Harper, and Harper put it on himself. Right in line with my hypothesis, Harper got more aggressive in 2017. That 71% swing rate in the heart of the plate jumped up to 81%. He struck out more and walked less in 2017. And he played better. A 1.0 OPS, great power numbers, exactly as advertised. He's been better than 35% above league average all but one season since 2016. And it's because when he sees a pitch to hit, he hits it a long way. Our first mystery is solved, and it exposes exactly how old school baseball minds think about this game. Based on the gut feelings of a lot of writers and analysts, it would make sense that a young hothead couldn't bear to take his base, but the numbers show exactly the opposite. And I'm glad that Bryce Harper listened to the right people and figured out the problem on his own, rather than listening to these talking heads. Speaking of old school, Jamie Moyer debuted back in 1986, and he was teammates with Gary Matthews Sr. He retired 2 years after Gary Matthews Jr. Moyer is the all-time leader in home runs allowed. In his second career start, he allowed a homer to Mike Schmidt. In his second to last start, Giancarlo Stanton took him deep. This guy played forever, and that's essential context to his story. Jamie Moyer had his Monstar season in 2004 at age 41. 41-year-old pitcher has career worst season isn't a headline, but it gets a lot more interesting when you realize he had 4 more good seasons left in the tank. Moyer's 1988 was his only good season in his 20s. He was a fairly mediocre journeyman through the first decade of his career, until he got traded to the Mariners midway through 1996. In Moyer's first 10.5 years before Seattle, he accumulated just over 10 wins above replacement. In 10.5 years as a Mariner, he was a 34 WAR player. Moyer was never really an ace, but he was a consistent mid-rotation arm who always had an ERA around the high 3s or low 4s. And most importantly, he barely ever missed a start. The only times he wasn't reliable in Seattle were in 2000 and 2004. Moyer pitched through shoulder and knee injuries in 2000, missing 8 starts and struggling when he was on the field. That's understandable, and like I said, we're not talking about injury runs here. So what went wrong in 2004? He didn't miss any starts, so health wasn't a problem, and he actually began the season fairly well. Through June 18th, he had a 3.64 ERA. Then something strange happened. On June 24th, one day before his scheduled start, the Mariners and Rangers game entered the 15th inning. Manager Bob Melvin called on the rubber-armed lefty from the bullpen. It was Moyer's first relief appearance since being traded to Seattle back in 1996. He loaded up the bases in the 15th, then got a double play to get out of the inning. But Seattle's bats, who'd scored 7 times in the first 7 innings, didn't add another run through the 18th. And in Moyer's 4th inning of relief, Alfonso Soriano walked him off. Moyer threw 54 pitches and faced 15 batters on a day where he wasn't scheduled to go. Remember that this is a 41-year-old man. Of course, the Mariners didn't let him start the next day as planned. He needed time to rest, so they skipped his Friday start and had him go on Sunday, June 27th. Yes, he threw another 104 pitches on 2 days rest for a last-place Mariners team in June. This is the MLB equivalent of elder abuse. He started on normal rest on July 2nd in St. Louis, but he was pulled after 2 innings because of a rain delay. So Melvin, in his infinite wisdom, had Moyer start on short rest again on July 6th. Which let him squeeze one final Moyer start in before the All-Star break on July 11th. He pitched a complete game loss. Alright, let's break this down. From June 24th to July 11th, Moyer pitched 5 times in 18 days. allowing 8 homers, 10 walks, 19 runs, and striking out just 14 batters. I understand that Moyer's role was to eat innings, but the Mariners went 0-5 in these 5 games because Moyer was obviously out of gas. In the second half of the season, Moyer had a .640 ERA and .579 FIP, allowing 19 homers in 90 innings. Moyer started on short rest 7 times in his 11 seasons with Seattle. Outside of this stretch, he never did it twice within a month, much less 18 days, and he never once threw on 2 days rest. This was also his last time starting on short rest as a Mariner, and he closed out his Seattle career as a still reliable 43-year-old starter, despite Bob Melvin's best efforts. The next time Moyer went on short rest was in 2008 with the Phillies. Entering play on September 11th, the Phils were 3 games out of a playoff spot. After winning the first game of a doubleheader on the 7th, Moyer picked up the win on 3 days rest. The Phillies went 5-0 in his September starts, including clinching the division on the 27th. It was a fantastic season 4 years after most people probably thought he was finished. Moyer pitched into the 7th inning in his lone World Series start that October, helping the Phillies take a 2-1 series lead in what would ultimately be his first and only championship victory. Regardless of his fastball sitting in the low 80s, and regardless of Moyer's mentality to pitch as much as possible, he still had a breaking point, and thankfully for Philadelphia, he wasn't broken for good after 2004. Another case near and dear to my heart happened when I was 9 years old. It was 2011, and I had just gotten into MLB The Show. My first Road to the Show player was drafted by the White Sox. I rose through the minors with Tyler Flowers and Diane Viciedo, joining a powerhouse lineup with Paul Konerko, Carlos Quinton, and of course, Adam Dunn. Dunn hit 40 or more homers each season from 2004 to 2008, then hit 38 homers in his 2 seasons with DC. He was the most prolific 3 true outcome player in MLB history, and the home runs were legendary.
And that is over the batter's eye.
Dunn was never a big WAR accumulator, because his defense was so bad that it all but negated his offense. The White Sox bringing him to the American League made perfect sense. If he hit his usual 35% above league average as a DH, he'd be a 3 WAR player. Perfect fit on paper, and great protection in the video game lineup. But as 2011 played out in the real world, Dunn ended up producing one of the worst seasons in MLB history. More precisely, the 7th worst position player season since integration, according to StatHead. A 159 average, horrible defense on the rare occasions he played the field, and somehow a sub-300 slugging percentage. This was good for a 54 OPS plus and negative 2.9 WAR. The strikeout rate ballooning to 35% was somewhat understandable. He reached a new career high in strikeouts the season prior, and he was always a high strikeout player. But going from averaging 40 homers a year over a 7-season span to homering 11 times and slugging .277 doesn't make any sense at all. And to add a cherry on top of things, he also had his worst base running season by far. I wouldn't say that he returned back to his normal production after 2011, but he still homered 41 times and made the All-Star team in 2012, and he never hit below average again in his career. 2011 is just such an insane outlier. I don't know if a player who was that good for that long has ever had a nosedive like that in the midst of his prime. There's exactly one plausible theory, and I'm not even sure that I buy it. Dunn's appendix burst on April 6th, and he missed about a week after the surgery, but honestly, he wasn't that bad for the first month or so after that. He was still worse than normal, but the real struggles began in mid-May. From May 15th on, Dunn hit 137 with a 37% strikeout rate and a .231 slugging percentage. The other reason I'm bearish on the appendectomy theory is that Matt Holliday had the same surgery the same week, and he had one of the best seasons of his career, including a red-hot April right when he got back. Maybe because of the appendectomy, Dunn started slow, and then the adjustments he made just made him worse? When he bounced back in 2012, he was asked about his previous year's struggles. He said that he didn't know what went wrong. He tried everything but turning around and hitting righty to break the slump. And considering his .064 average and .074 slug versus lefties, maybe that would've worked. Outside of 2011, Dunn had pretty typical splits for a lefty. For some reason, and I have no idea why, Dunn hit like a pitcher against lefties in 2011. Even though I'm skeptical, the appendix theory still seems the most plausible. I just don't know how he could go from that good to that bad because of a very common procedure. This case has left me the most stumped, so leave a comment down below if you have your own theory. And before we get to our final case, please scroll down below and check if you're subscribed. Odds are you've seen my content before, and if you're still watching, you're obviously enjoying. Hitting that button is free and it helps me out a ton, and we're closing in on 100,000 subscribers, so every single one is appreciated. Thanks! Yankees fans will tell you that some players simply can't handle the bright lights of New York. Joey Gallo was never the same after his trade to the Yankees.
Strike three! He struck him out! What a coincidence! Oh my god!
Sonny Gray had a near 7 ERA while pitching at home in 2018, then re-emerged as a star just as soon as he left. Javier Vazquez was elite with the Expos, had his worst season of his prime with the Yankees, got elite again in his early 30s, then returned to the Yankees and had an even worse season. Even Randy Johnson had an outlier bad season in pinstripes. But I decided that one Yankee was enough for now, and I went with by far the most relevant choice. Devin Williams just went from maybe the best closer of the 2020s to the biggest problem on baseball's biggest team. Since this case is ongoing, I'm taking the bet that he will be good again, and I'll present that argument. But we need context first. Williams is unquestionably a top 3 relief pitcher of the 2020s. There are a few others in the conversation, but the top 3 on paper are Emmanuel Clase, Edwin Diaz, and Williams. With Clase under investigation for gambling, it's very possible that his career is over. That leaves Diaz and the Airbender, who have near identical rate and volume stats since 2020. But right now, the gap in perception could not be farther apart. Assuming Edwin opts out this winter, both of these pitchers are hitting free agency at about the same age. I don't think anyone would be surprised if Diaz signed for well over twice as much as Williams. That's because Williams has been absolutely dreadful this year, which just so happens to be his first year with big market exposure. The surface level stats are startling. This guy has had a sub-2 ERA for each of the last 3 seasons, and now his ERA is over 5. He has more earned runs this year than his previous 3 years combined. With relievers, my first train of thought for an ERA spike like this is bad luck. I made a whole video on reliever volatility last winter, and Williams has undoubtedly suffered from some terrible luck. Fans don't want to hear it, but it's true. A mid-50s left-on base rate is unsustainably low, over 20 points lower than his career mark. But outside of that, he's just pitching worse. His strikeout minus walk rate is the worst it's been since his 2019 cup of coffee. His quality of contact allowed is more damaging, and the big culprit is his lefty-righty splits. He's still been one of the best pitchers in baseball versus righties, but he's gone from good enough against lefties to nearly unusable. Again, luck has played a role, but the underlying data suggests that he's just not as effective against them. His FIP and XFIP are both around 5, with a ground ball rate down near 30% versus southpaws. 4 of the 5 homers he's allowed were hit by lefties. So again, I ask, why is that the case? Well, his bread and butter pitch, the low changeup, generated a 57% whiff rate versus lefties in 2021. It was 50% last year, and it never went below 40% since 2019. Now, it's hardly half of that, sitting in the low 20s. And I honestly don't know why it's not working. His arm angle has dropped a full 10 degrees since 2020, but that was a gradual change over time, not in line with such a stark drop-off in production. Pitching Plus and other models like his pitches as much as ever. The command and stuff are still there on paper. This is still one of the best pitchers in MLB in a vacuum. Ultimately, that's why I think he'll return to greatness. The unteachable aspect of his game that makes him an outlier is still there. But for some reason, it's just not working right now. My leading theory is that lefties have picked up an early cue that the changeup is coming. Maybe not in the traditional pitch tipping sense, like glove placement. Maybe a more subtle visual sign based on his arm angle. Or they're seeing his grip when he cocks his arm back. Maybe he's not establishing a good tunnel with his fastball, and batters are picking up the tail on his changeup sooner. I honestly have no idea, because a drop-off like this isn't explained by any of the data that I'm seeing. We know how he's getting beat, but not why. Either by the end of this season or sometime this offseason, Williams will have his problem diagnosed by people smarter than me, and he will figure out a solution. If this down year affects his market, he'll probably be a steal of a free agent next year. His talent didn't just evaporate overnight. I know I'm gonna get a lot of comments about him being unclutch because of his playoff track record, but I don't think 3 playoff games is a sufficient sample to prove that he's mentally incapable of getting big outs. This guy was one of the best closers in baseball for years on a great team. One at-bat versus Pete Alonso didn't break him. The next thing people will say is that he can't handle New York. Maybe on some personal level that's true. His body language all year has looked like someone just killed his cat, but his results at home are actually much better than his results on the road. According to FIP, xFIP, strikeout minus walk, everything reliable, this guy has been great at Yankee Stadium. The bright lights argument doesn't explain the gap between his quality of pitches and the results. Going forward, I think it makes the most sense for the Yankees to use a committee approach with their bullpen. Williams should still be used in medium or high leverage spots as long as he has a solid run of righties to face. And I'm guessing he won't return here next year regardless of what happens. But trust me, he will be a great closer again at some point in time. If you want to support the channel, early access to videos, and exclusive members-only content, hit that join button down below for just $4 a month. Shout out to my channel members Misty, Zach G, Ethan, Alex, Mammoth, Zach E, Vikram, El Quacko, Richard, JJ, John, Ryan, Jackson, Flyatory, Basti, Sophie, Centerlion, Vifi, Okay Then But Why, Lorenzo, Perdower, and GF. Thanks so much for watching.